When you are about to start practicing this joint, try this first. Mark a line on your practice plate before you even arc up and put anything together. And then using a bandsaw or whatever you have, cut approximately 1 to 2 inches off your practice plate like this. Okay, now the question, why am I doing this? This is exactly how we take care of one of the most annoying problems I see with TIG welding. This is the problem right here. We can see that there are 2 passes here, one going down this side of the joint and the other heading away from the corner here. Looking at this one a little more closely, we can see that there is an improper connection between these 2 welds. Sometimes this can be really small, sometimes a little bit of a crater left behind, but sometimes this connection can even leave even bigger gaps in between these 2 passes. And this can take even a couple great looking passes and leave a massive problem behind. And unfortunately, this is gonna cancel out any nice work that's been done around it. I'm gonna ask you something. Have you ever taken a legitimate welding test before? If you have, you know what I'm talking about here. But if you haven't, it's all good. Check this out. When you're taking a welding test, the goal is to run a pass along the length of a welding joint. And we need to consistently fill the joint with heat input and filler material. Now, this is the popular term that you're gonna hear all the time called welding penetration. We want a great looking weld that we can see on a joint, of course, but when it comes to welding, this is where somebody really has to put their money where their mouth is. We want to also control our welding so we can penetrate into the base material. We don't want a weld that just sits on the surface looking pretty. We want this to actually dig down into the base material. With thinner material or a butt joint, whatever, doesn't matter. You can effectively weld on the top side and then also penetrate the joint so that there is reinforcement on the back side of it as well. Now, when taking a welding test like this fillet joint here, typically there is a stop-start that is involved with the test. The goal here is to terminate your weld in a specified area, and then after you're gonna pick up and reestablish the weld and carry on for the second half. After the weld is done, this area is scrutinized to make sure that the penetration stayed consistent over this stop-start. Usually this is done by a destructive welding test where the joint is cut open and examined. It's broken apart so we can take a look at the inside edge of the welding pass. So consistent penetration from start to finish, this is what you want. Now, what is common is that typically when somebody does the first half, welding penetration will be good up to this point, but then as the stop-start is performed, there is a slight void in this penetration. And then unfortunately, in this case, the welding test is failed or incomplete. So now that we can understand what the goal of having a stop-start in a straight pass is, we can see how any problems that involve gaps or voids in your welding passes going around a corner, this is a massive problem. You're now taking something that basically just was a straight pass, but we are now breaking it in half and adding the corner to look out for. Not only do you have to maintain proper consistency across all of them, but you have to remain consistent with the penetration on the inside. So you can understand that even seasoned professionals who sometimes encounter problems, even just with the straight passes, doing this around a corner is going to be notoriously tricky unless you know to look out for it. These gaps in between your welding passes can become areas where cracks can form. This can lead to welding failure later down the line, as well as a lot of other problems. If this is done with stuff like stainless steel or mild steel, this can obviously be a hot spot for corrosion down the line. That is really bad news. Now, we all practice welding by running joints, but here is a trick that I teach my students. The first thing you're gonna do is take your 2 welding coupons that you're about to use. These are 1/8 of an inch or 3.2 millimeter thickness of material. But instead of just tacking them together like this and then sending it, you're gonna take your top plate here, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna mark off approximately 2 inches from the end here. Using a bandsaw or whatever you want, and all of your proper safety gear, follow your line and cut this off. Decontaminate after cutting, then you go to assemble your joint. Leave a gap of approximately 1 inch for either side. This is how we are going to assemble our joint. Now, obviously with this configuration, we do have a shorter welding pass on the straight sides that you're gonna practice on, but now we get the opportunity to practice one of the most difficult parts of a welding joint, the corners and the connections. When my students go through my TIG welding program online, the last thing that we do in the program is a final project. And one of the biggest things that we are practicing on this project is proper connections and proper corner wraps. Snipping off the end of your practice coupon is gonna allow you to practice this right in your shop right now. But very importantly, now let's think about how we are gonna weld this. Here's the mistake that most people do when they do this exercise. Unfortunately, what they do is they think about this exercise as if they are doing 2 welds. 2 sides, 2 welds. But this here is what I have taught for years. You've got 2 welds and 2 corners, so you need to approach this like it is 4 welds, not 2. Here is how I tack this joint together. Pay attention, start taking notes. Do not put your tacks on the ends like this. I'll show you why this is important when we actually weld this in a second here. Make sure that when you are tacking these together to give these good filler and blend these out. We don't want them too proud and we don't want them too big. This will become an obstacle that you'll have to deal with later. We want them the same leg length and profile that you will for the actual weld. We want a profile like this, not this. This here is what we want. It's very important that this is how you tack this together. Instead of putting one tack on each end of the joint like this here, what you're gonna do is put a tack weld on one side just away from the corner like this here, and then you're gonna mirror that on the other side. You're gonna repeat this with the other side so that we do not have any tack welding on the end where we're going to be doing our wraps. Now, I'm gonna be tweaking my settings a little bit as I start to get through this welding exercise as I do it. So what I'll be doing is posting my settings at the end of this episode. Stay tuned for those. Okay, now let's weld this sucker. Now, the first tack is gonna be where we start. Don't start on the end here. What we wanna do is tuck your start right inside of this little pocket here. This is basically gonna be like a baseball in a catcher's mitt. And then you will flash up and do your pass as normal, heading away from this area. Focus on your shape and size. Make sure that the leg lengths are blending out as far as you want. I actually just did a video on this just a couple weeks ago. Check it out, it helps a lot. Keep your stepping distance really nice and tight as you start to travel and keep it consistent. I'm making sure that I have enough filler material in, but making sure I'm not overfilling. And as I'm approaching the next tack here, I'm gonna stop and terminate right on the tack. Okay, let's go over what I mentioned earlier when I talked about why it's important that we do not tack on the end of the joint. Like we talked about, we wanna think about the corner wrap as if it is its own weld. Now, if you had put your tack right here at the end, it would now be right in the way to mess with your consistency. This also presents a problem where it can potentially block penetration, as well as introduce more chances for potential bad connections or voids. So now that our weld terminated right here, we now have a straight shot around the corner where we can ensure proper heat input for penetration and proper connections. Now remember what we talked about with our last little baseball and the catcher's mitt? We're gonna do the same thing here. Start in this pocket and make sure that the weld legs blend out fully. We want decent filler amount for good profile, and then we terminate just as you did on the next tack. Now we can basically do the same start right in the pocket on our other side. And all you have to do is make sure that you are properly blending into the last stop. And then as things start to take shape, you want to make sure that you match the profile you did on the other sides. Super easy. Keep up a good amount of filler material without overfilling. Maintain proper stepping distance and consistency. At this point, the piece should be nice and hot. So perhaps keep up your heat as normal, but speed up your travel speed a bit. Or you can drop your heat slightly and you can keep the comfortable travel speed that you want. And then as we approach the tack at the end, we're gonna repeat just as we did on the other side. And then we light up to do the final wrap and tie everything around as we travel around the corner here to finish. And then same deal, just make sure you're blending in properly to connect passes. And the final button snuggles up nice and tight to the first start on the other side. Okay, let's take a look at this one. I'm pretty happy with this. We can see for the most part, everything stayed nice and straight. Take a look at the overall leg length of each of these passes. The puddle reached all the way out to the bottom plate, and it covers about the exact same amount on the top plate. The distance in stepping looks pretty good. Things relatively nice and tight together. We can see the amount of filler material match the amount of heat being used really well, and we can see the cleaning action is nice and consistent as well. One thing that we can see here is that the corner has been wrapped nice and consistently. There's a nice little half moon round shape on the bottom plate as it travels around the corner. And most of all, take a look. We don't see any gaps or voids in between the passes. Each of these little half moon shapes have been done pretty consistently, and they've connected the welds properly. So even though these are two separate welds, they've been connected together by an individual pass right here, nice and clean. This one's a lot of fun. For a little welding exercise you can make with 2 coupons, give this one a try. See how you do. Now in the description below, this is where I have links to go take my online classes for free. They are on demand. You can watch them as many times as you want, wherever you want. This is my random act of kindness to all of you here today. Make sure that you go do a random act of kindness for a stranger today as well. I'm Dusty James, Phil and Chill. We'll talk soon. Peace.